Okay, well, welcome everyone to our Business Central Summer Workshop. This is our last workshop of the series. It's been an exciting summer, just kicking it off with these workshops for certain ERPs, wrapping it up with Business Central. I am your host, Amy Keenan, founder of the ISV Society. Excited to have you all here. Part of our workshop, we have a great lineup of speakers and sessions today. So this is our agenda, just so you can see. We are recording this, as you know, so we will be sending out an email with the recording so that way you can view them or share them with some of the others on your team, or if you have to jump off, come back on, whatever it is, don't worry, we will send you an email so you'll have them all. We also will have a handout that I have mentioned in the emails that you might have received about all of this information broken down by questions to take back to your team, key takeaways and things like that. So I will put that handout in the comments as soon as we kick things off. So make sure you download that, but I'll also be including that in the email as well. So in case you forget to download it during this session today, don't worry, we will have it in the email. And again, you can share with others on your team as well. If you do have any questions, we do have everybody presenting for roughly 50 minutes to leave some Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, make sure that you put them in the Q&A or the chat. We will get to them at the end of each session. So yeah, feel free to put them in there. We love to answer questions. We love to have questions. We like to create some kind of back and forth and make it a little interactive as we can, even though it is a webinar. So please feel free, don't hesitate to put your questions, comments, anything like that in the chat. We will happily get back to you on them, whether it's here, and if we don't have time, we certainly will have our presenters get back to you on one-on-one as well. So they'll have all your contact information to be able to do that. Okay, so that's enough of the housekeeping and all of that. I am going to introduce Cynthia, who is going to talk all about optimizing Business Central, assessing your organization's usage. She is the MVP. So excited to have her here, kicking it off, sharing her knowledge and expertise in Business Central. So welcome, Cynthia, to our workshop today.
Well, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Yes.
I'm never shy when it comes to talking about Business Central and how it can help you out. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get right into the material.
Oh, and just a reminder, sorry, everybody has 3 polling questions. So if you do need CPE, make sure that you answer those polling questions for us. I will also have a poll at the end asking if you need CPE. If you say yes, we will get that certificate to you within 48 hours. So make sure you stay tuned for that in your email. With that, I will hand it over to you.
Great. So optimizing Business Central, who doesn't want to do that? The challenge, though, that we have is we're using a system, we're using an ERP system, and are we even sure that we are using it to the greatest extent possible? Well, I'll tell you what, I have been working with Business Central, of course, its predecessor Nav, for almost 20 years. And the interesting thing about Business Central is that there is more than one way to do just about anything in Business Central when you look at the standard functionality. And then when you consider all of the ISV opportunities or the add-ins or any extensions that you can do, it's just limitless. So if you are sitting around and you are thinking that you have people on your team or you yourself are saying there's got to be a better way, there just may be. I've worked with end users, I've worked with partners, their end users and ISVs, and I've pretty much seen it all. And what I'm going to try to do today is get through what we need to do to understand, number one, what is a utilization review and why should you be doing one? And if you do need to do one, which you should be, how frequently should you be doing it? And can you do it yourself? Is it something that you can take charge of and get the results that we're going to talk about today? Because I'm going to tell you some real life stories. And if you do decide to do it yourself, or you decide to bring someone in to help you, what do you need to do to get started? So first of all, what is a utilization review? All right, well, a utilization review, you could also call it a health check. If you think about it, let's say you have high blood pressure. So throughout the year, you check your blood pressure and everything looks good, but you still need to go in and see the doctor. And the doctor checks your blood pressure. And they check some other things too that you weren't maybe thinking about. And maybe that means that something else or another action needs to be taken. What about your automobile? You put fuel in it, you change the oil, you make sure there's air in the tires, you change the tires. But every so many thousand miles, and it depends on your vehicle, of course, and how often you use it and what you use it for, but you need to go in and you need to take it to a professional, or maybe you're capable of doing it. You need to dive in a little bit deeper and do a further assessment to keep that vehicle running. Maybe you moved. Maybe you didn't have a need for all season or snow tires. So you go to a new place, that same vehicle needs something different now. Maybe where you were, the air conditioning that didn't work didn't matter, but now you go somewhere where it's hot and the air conditioner matters. So being able to look at what it is that you're using all the time that's going just great, but taking it to that next level. Your performance evaluation for yourself. You're doing your job, you're keeping track of what you're doing, but do the other people in the organization, are they aware of what you're doing? Are you aware of what they're doing? Are there things that you could be doing to help that you're unaware of? If you just sit at your desk and work by yourself, you're not going to be aware of that. So that annual performance review or those regular meetings that you have with someone higher up to understand better what's going on in the entire organization and how you can impact it are very, very important. So let's talk about a utilization review. We've talked about a health check. We've talked about a systems assessment. We've talked about a performance evaluation. You will hear all of those terms used for this purpose. All of that can be applied to your Business Central system. I'm going to use the term utilization review. That's what I've used for years because the whole purpose behind this is to make sure that I'm utilizing the system to the best of its ability. So what is a utilization review? It's a critical evaluation by a qualified entity, and yes, I'm reading the slide, I don't normally do that, for the purpose of finding where technology and systems are in alignment, because that's a good thing too. You're not just looking for where they aren't. So the idea is our company processes and our company goals and our technology, are they all going in the same direction? Are they supporting each other? Is my system holding me back? Are my processes holding back my ability to use my system? So Amy, we have our first poll. So are you using a polling tool here in Zoom?
I am.
Okay.
I don't have, so I, for some reason, this poll didn't pick up the answers to where do your ideas or processes originate.
All right, so we'll say choice. Okay.
Okay, you're back. You were out for a second. You're back.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Everybody, I live in the country, so every once in a while. All right. Well, can we have them go ahead and respond to the poll so that you have that
Sure.
recording of that? And why don't you put in the chat where your ideas and processes for improvement come from? For example, do you have a suggestion box? Is it a real box in the cafeteria? Do you have a virtual suggestion box? Do you have weekly things? If everybody could share, that would be great.
Yes, put that in the chat, please. And we have 3 that said choice 1. So I'm going to go check and see what happened. Make sure the other polls have the answers in it before
Okay,
I launch
perfect.
them. But I'm sorry about that. Not sure what happened.
That's okay. I know that we just need to have that recording if you're doing CPE.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Poll
All
2
right. Well,
looks good. So we're good there. And
okay.
poll.
So if you need CPE,
6.
please make sure you pick choice 1 or 2. Don't
Yep.
care which one it is. But the idea here is if you're just waiting until there's a problem, you have another problem. You have a bigger problem. You should be looking at this all the time. All right. Now, if you're doing a utilization review, what are you looking to find? I like to look at this in 2 main categories. Now, there's a lot more than this. You know, this is a 50-minute presentation. I could talk about this kind of stuff all day, but we're talking about time. The idea here is when we're reviewing how our system is supporting us in our daily performance of our job, our work, or getting our product or service out to our client, we want to eliminate as much redundant work as we can. And redundant work can take the form in doing the same task more than once that's unnecessary. And a lot of times those are easy to find if the task is exactly the same. But what if you're doing work that's different to the same outcome? And those are redundant tasks, but they may not be visible. We're going to talk about some examples of things that I found in doing utilization reviews over the years that have made a difference. We found the problem and the solution, and you'll learn about a couple of those. Identify processes that have been modified without review. Okay, so the idea here is as we work, we do something, we form a standard operating procedure or process, and we work along and we follow that process. And months go by, years go by, however long it is. And I almost guarantee you that what you're doing today is not what you were given in writing 18 months ago. Now, that's probably because things have changed and that process needed to be changed. But did that process go and make that transformation for the right reasons? The other thing that happens when it comes to finding time is we can increase accuracy. Whenever we're rushed, we make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, that impacts the outcome in the system. And accuracy, and i.e. the lack of mistakes, and timely access to data are very important in running our business. If I do not keep track of my inventory by recording what's shipped immediately, I wait until the next day and ship an invoice, my data on my inventory is not accurate in the evening because I have inventory that left the building that will not be recorded until the next morning. Another category of the two that I look at is profit. And when we talk about profit, what we're talking about is increasing communication and doing anything that we can to improve the delivery of our service or our product to our customers. Because happy customers are returning customers. Returning customers are more profitable than brand new customers. We know that it is easier to increase the sales with existing customers than it is to get new customers. So if our system and our processes are doing everything we can to that end, our profits should go up. Can we increase our output without burning out our people? So if we want to increase output and output takes time, we need to get rid of those redundant tasks so that time is freed up to increase that output. Because we want to make sure that our output increases, our quality increases, and everything that we do is better, but we still need to work towards work-life balance for our employees. I was just talking with somebody the other day about how I remember many years ago, oh, the productivity of the United States of America far exceeds any other nation that's out there. Well, my daughter lives in England and she gets 5 weeks vacation every year. She didn't have to wait to get 5 weeks vacation. They are also really good about stopping their day on time. So they work less hours. So if you look at how many hours we put in and how many hours they put in, of course we're going to be more productive. So it's not so much that we're smarter, we're brighter, we have more fingers, we can run faster, we can produce more in the same amount of time necessarily, but is it that we're spending more time? So what can we do to make that better? And lastly, just kind of the catch-all, any change to positively affect profitability. Could be reporting, it could be a system or a process, it could be a new add-in that we need to make something easier. And one of the things, if you've seen any of my content, you'll notice that I focused on standard functionality. But when I'm working with clients, if there's a gap, I'm quickly looking for an ISV solution. So I was really excited to be part of this because I'm going to be focusing on standard stuff and you're going to hear more about optimization with ISV. So if you think about this utilization review, it could seem overwhelming. If you think, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take? So you need to decide what to target. And what I usually recommend is look at processes that are critical to your organization that have not been in recent focus. Because if you just put in a new production line and that caused you to look at all of your production bombs and make sure that they were all clean and correct, I'm probably not going to start my utilization review in the cleanliness and the accuracy of your production bombs. So think about areas that are critical or important to your organization that may be neglected. Now, when I say neglected, it's not that, oh, it's in the corner and it's that little talked about department. It could be one of the most significant areas in your organization. But guess what? You might have really, really good employees. And if you do, what you're going to find is good people figure it out. So you could have an area that's been neglected, that has not gotten a lot of attention, that is running smoothly as far as you know. But you may have people that are jumping through hoops that they shouldn't need to be jumping through, or are performing redundant activities to ensure that accuracy and that smoothness. And they're the ones that are maybe burning themselves out, and you're not even aware of it because that department doesn't have any, and if you can see me, I'm doing air quotes, any problems. So let me share with you some of what I've experienced over the years. And I wanted to make sure that you walked away from this session with an understanding that there's functionality in Business Central that solves problems that people that are using the system didn't even realize were problems possibly, or didn't realize were possible to be shared or to be cured or solved with something in Business Central. Do we have any questions in chat or anything, Amy? If you have any
Not
questions?
yet, but I hope
Okay.
we do get some questions. So again, put them in the chat or Q&A. We will get to them.
All right. Well, you might have some as we go through these. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. I am going to be talking about specific functionality. I will share with you the correct terms. Amy, I think we're going to be able to make the slide deck available also. Is that correct to
Yes.
everybody? Okay. So you'll have this list that you can refer back to. But let me talk about the first one, which is segregating shipping and invoicing activities from the actual physical order in Business Central. So this is a situation where you had, in this case, and by the way, this is one of the areas that I think is most frequently changed in the organizations that I've worked with. And that's because I have a tendency to work with the smaller on the SMB side of the scale that have moved into the middle of the SMB scale. And what's happened is when they started using the system, they put in a sales order, they shipped from the sales order, and they invoiced from the sales order. And it may or may not have been the same person. It probably started out as the same person. Then it moved to, well, there was somebody in the warehouse that really is going into the sales order and shipping. And then all of a sudden you start realizing that this is probably not the best way. You might have, your accountant has said you need some segregation. You might have that the people who are shipping are accidentally changing things on the order that you don't want to have changed. So how can you segregate shipping and invoice activities from the order without going into what I'll call full-blown warehousing? Well, there's a couple of standard things that we can do in Business Central. One of them is called sales order shipping. Sales order shipping is a page in Business Central, and what it is it's basically a page that's looking at the same two tables that the sales order looks at. However, this sales order shipping page has disabled or not even showing at all fields that have no need or shouldn't be changed in the process of shipping. So the idea here is that through permissions and security, you disable your shipper from being able to get to the sales order and allow them to use sales order shipping for their shipping. So if you're still small enough that you don't need all this extra warehouse functionality, but you do have a different person doing the shipping, you might want to consider sales order shipping. When it comes to the invoicing, we have the same thing. So I can actually have my salespeople or my customer service people work with the orders, use sales order shipping to ship. That page, again, is limited to fields and values to be used by a shipper. And then I can use sales order invoicing. And sales order invoicing has the fields and values available. It's still a view of the same two tables that are used in the sales order, but it's intended for sales order invoicing. You can't accidentally invoicing something that hasn't been shipped. And by the way, when you're shipping and you hit post, it just ships. There's no choice. Now, another thing that's come out recently that's kind of in between these two things, if you're not ready to go to this level and you need to have everybody working from the sales order, you can actually, through user setup, there are now settings where you can prohibit someone from invoicing from the sales order. So whoever your shipper is on their user setup, you would prohibit them from being able to invoice. So when they go to hit post on the sales order, it'll just say, do you want to ship these items? That does not stop them, though, from changing any of the values in any of those other fields that aren't really pertinent to shipping, like the sales order shipping does. Another way to segregate the invoicing is to use a sales invoice. So you create a sales invoice. And in this case, this is what the majority of the customers that I work with have a tendency to go to rather than sales order shipping. Give you an example. I have had one client that what was happening is almost all of their customers would get multiple shipments throughout the week. They were in the food service business. So they would be shipped on different days. They had their own trucks. And up to this point, what they were doing is every shipment they would invoice. Well, they started getting customers who said, can you just invoice me once for all of the shipments of the week? But these customers were like calling on Monday for stuff and calling on Wednesday for stuff and calling on Friday for stuff. And the stuff would go right out. Well, all of a sudden now they have 3 orders and they need to invoice them all on one invoice. Well, they didn't know how to do that. So they said, is it okay if we just send you all 3 invoices on the same day? They're like, yeah, that's fine, but we really would like to have one invoice. So I shared with them, create a sales invoice, go ahead and select the customer, and then use the get shipments function to find the shipments that need to be invoiced. They come into the sales invoice. It indicates what shipment it is, the items, and you can invoice all of them together. Now you can take this to another level with what we call combined shipments, which is a more automated approach. So if this is intriguing to you and you want to use Microsoft Learn to get more information about it, think in terms of get shipments or combined shipments. What about standard information on sales documents? So you're in the situation where every time somebody gets an invoice, you want a disclaimer on it on the bottom, or every time during a special campaign, you want a few comment lines to come in. This is where we can use recurring sales lines. What this allows us to do is create standard lines that can be easily invoked and brought into any document, sales or purchase. I just happen to be focusing on sales here. So I can say that automatically, whenever I create a sales order for this particular customer, these lines will come in. So this is a great way in combination with recurring invoicing to be able to do the same invoice over and over, maybe a weekly or monthly invoice. Now, this is not to be confused with the newer functionality that's coming out for subscriptions, but by using these recurring sales lines, I can create sets of lines that will either automatically or can be manually added through a click to any sales document or purchase document. I can also use what's called extended text. I'm working with a client right now that we're moving them over from another system, but this would apply if you were doing your utilization review. It's the same thing. Very, very long part number. And what they're doing is they have this long part number and they have a lot of description that goes underneath the line with the part that their customers need to see. And it's kind of like the specs for those items. So what they do is right now they type in every single time what they need to put in there. Well, I shared with them if they create extended text for all those items, because that text is the same on that item, no matter what customer buys that item. and they can go ahead and they can build their order line by line, and then at the end, go ahead and trigger to have the extended text come in, and it'll come in. You can also make it so that it automatically comes in. So when I add that item line, the extended text comes in. But when it comes to data entry, I don't want to have a line, 5 lines of text, go to the next line to enter. It would be a lot easier to type each one in and then let the text come in. Well, that's a good example of what happens in a review. When I shared this with them originally, I had set the automatic extended text. So the minute they put the line in, those lines came in. But they said, you know what? It will be hard for data entry. So there's a good example of how some give and take, a standard feature not only has one way of using that new feature that's different, but there's more than one way to use that feature. Just like the recurring sales line. Do I want them to come in automatically, or do I want to call them in? Sales tax nightmares. I can't tell you how many times when I'm doing a utilization review, and it's a customer, a company that is doing sales tax, the sales tax is a problem. It's amazing how many times nobody knows it's a problem. One of the biggest ones that I have found is that they have their sales tax set up improperly in Business Central for reporting to. So for example, in Ohio, we have 3 levels of tax frequently. We have the city, the county, and the state, but everything is paid to the state. It's amazing how many customers have it so that their reporting has the city, the county, and the state separately, so they have to add it together for the reporting. There is a place in the tax jurisdiction to indicate on the county tax and on the city tax that I report it to Ohio. And I have found that I don't know how many times. Now, the person who's doing the tax reporting is not complaining because they've figured out what they need to do, but there's a better way, or there's a righter way. I will also tell you that very frequently when you start out and maybe you're working locally and you have small number of tax jurisdictions, but as your company grows, you need to possibly consider when it's time to think of some sort of outside resource to help you with the sales tax. And I'm not saying that because we happen to have an ISV that's going to be sharing that, but that is very frequently what happens. It was fine to start out with, and you had some ways that you got the tax rates in, et cetera. But as time goes on, you've got Nexus to worry about and a lot of reporting. So when is the right time to think about moving to a more robust solution? And actually, that can be when you're multi-state. All right. Another one. Customer couldn't use dropship to create their purchase orders. They couldn't use them because whenever they sold something, they sold it for a particular quantity, and then they created a purchase order for that quantity. But the quantity of that purchase order was never exactly equal to what was on the sales order because of the way the product was run. And there were a couple of other reasons they couldn't use dropship. So what they were doing is they were creating their sales orders. They were copying the sales lines into Excel. They were putting them into a different format so they could easily copy them into the purchase order, which is kind of what dropship does with some other connections there. But again, they couldn't use it. Well, we had no idea that this person was doing this. And we had no idea when we were going through the review that they would have 30 lines on a dropship order. Now, all of these items were not inventoried. So every time they had this situation, the sales demand was requiring that they get the product from the vendor and the vendor would drop ship it. So I showed them how to use order planning. So we went ahead and we put the sales orders in right away. The same person that was doing all the copy and the paste, they went right away to order planning. They went and they created the plan. They went ahead and they filtered it to sales demand. They found their order. They were on one of the lines. They clicked on active order and they created a purchase order. And they used the customer's purchase order number in one of the reference fields for the numbers in the purchase order. So granted, it doesn't have the same connectivity as the dropship, but it did what it needed to do for them. And then we also handled kind of managing that dropship and that whole purchase order, sales order connection, we did some other changes in the way we looked at the sales order information and the purchase order information. But if you don't ask the questions, if you don't go sit down with someone and say, okay, could you give me an idea what you do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and a monthly basis to get your job done? I'm not here to threaten your job. I am not here to, say that you're doing something wrong. I'm here to help make your job easier. Tracking returns to vendors. Send the return to the vendor, add it to an Excel spreadsheet. Send a return to a vendor, add it to an Excel spreadsheet. How many are doing that? I hear that all the time because I can't create a credit memo. I don't have any of the information from the vendor yet. Well, guess what? This is where you can use a return order instead of a credit memo. So the credit memo is a receive an invoice in one step. I can actually create a return order, ship that return order, which takes that item out of my inventory, or possibly use it as a GL account, depends on what it is. And I have a record in my system that I am waiting for a credit from the vendor. And I can go at any point in time and see all the return orders. I don't have to go find that Excel spreadsheet that may be on somebody's local drive. Hopefully, at least it's in SharePoint and accessible to everybody. But if it's not, now I have it in the system and I can see it in the system. And the great thing about it is, if I'm putting it on an Excel spreadsheet, when I send it out, it might be still showing up in my inventory. What did I do to get it out of my inventory? So the return order, by shipping it, takes the item out of inventory and lets me know that I'm waiting for a credit from the vendor. Reducing debit versus credit errors in journal entries. There's a feature in Business Central in General Ledger Setup where you can show all amounts, and it will add a credit and debit account to columns to the journal entries. The great thing about that is if you're somebody like me, I like that because then I don't have to worry about whether the amount's positive or negative. I know whether it's a debit or credit. Now, I have a good friend, Carrie Carosa. If any of you have seen us present before, we have a good time together. She hates those columns, but you know what? She can personalize them off. Or somebody can customize the profile for certain users and take those columns off. I love them. She hates them. As long as they're enabled in General Ledger Setup, we have an option. Minor change, huge impact. Using the appropriate journal. I have people who use the general journal for everything. Well, the AL in general does not mean all right? There are sales journals and purchase journals and recurring journals and cash receipt journals. And all of those journals are on top of the general journal line. But those pages have logic and help built into them to help you do a more accurate entry. When I go into a sales journal and I put in that the document type is an invoice, it knows it's a sales invoice. If I go into a purchase journal and I put in an invoice, it knows it's a purchase invoice. If I go into a payment journal and put in a payment, it knows it's going to be reducing my AP. If I go into a cash receipt journal and pick payment, it knows it's reducing my AR. So it is very helpful when you start working with a system to use the appropriate journal in the appropriate place. And the recurring journals will help you keep on track with month end close activities. So if it's something that you do month after month, always look at a recurring journal first. If you're doing copy and paste and that kind of thing, sometimes the recurring doesn't work for that. That's okay. But if it's a monthly recurring entry, start with the recurring journal and prove that that won't work before you go to another one. Payment processing takes days. I will tell you, I had a client, and this is so true. They were creating purchase orders and getting the purchase orders approved before they could send them off to the vendor. Once the vendor approved the purchase order, they had to send it to that other person that approved it the first time to say that the vendor approved it. Are you still okay with it? They approved it again. By the way, this was all done with paper. After that, when the stuff came in and the stuff was received, after it was received and it was marked on the purchase order, it had to go to the person that did the purchase order before it could be received in the system to say it was okay to receive it in the system. After that, once it was received and the invoice came in and everything matched in the invoice to the receipts that were being said to be invoiced, that still had to be approved before they could post that invoice. And then when it came time to pay that invoice, they had to get approval from the person that did the purchase order that it was okay to pay it. And then once they said that was okay to pay it, they had to go to the person who determined whether there was enough cash to pay everything that was intended to be paid. That is a true story. And guess what? The controller and the CFO had no idea that this was all happening. And it was all happening because years ago, at different points in time, they had different problems, and these checks were added at different points in time. Every time when we went and asked, how many times have you had to disapprove something? It was never. And it was amazing because what happened was they realized that they found the source of the problem that caused the checks, removed the source of the problem, and never removed the check. How many have had something like that, where you have put something in place and it could have possibly been changed because something else removed the problem that step was put in place to address? Think about it. Another one is to use suggest payments. I cannot believe how many times I'm working with a company and I get to work with the person who's doing accounts payable, and they're entering each line in the payment journal. Suggest payments. Yes, it seems a little confusing when you look at the choices that you need to make to suggest payments to vendors, suggest payment to employees, which, by the way, is something to consider using. Your employees do not need to be vendors. And we also have the ability to connect customers that are also vendors and use a suggest customer vendor payment or combination in making vendor payments to make sure that we owe them, that there is a net difference, that we owe them something. Gizmo decided to join the webinar. So if I look at it and I'm going through line by line, I'm using my brain to figure out, is this due now? Should I put this on here? I need to look at the discount due date, or do I need to, because does this vendor even have discounts? All of that stuff is taken into account with suggest payments. Use it. The great thing about suggest payments is it's just a suggestion. So you populate the payment journal. No, you didn't do it, but the system did. It's using all the criteria you're trying to keep in your head. It's in its head, and I'll guarantee you it's better at it than you are. It suggests all those lines. You can use the vendor prepayment journal report, which is kind of a weird name for it. Sounds like it's prepayments, but it's not. It's the journal prior to making payments. And when you print that out or preview it, it lists the grouping. So you're going to pay this vendor this amount, and here's the invoices. Oh, and by the way, here's the credit memos applied. In other words, you're looking at the applied entries. So if you're doing ACH and you're getting one line per vendor, you get to see all that detail in writing. That's what you can hand to somebody and say, all right, here's what the system suggested. Here's what I redlined I'm going to take out because I don't think we should pay it, because I remembered so-and-so said, we're looking into this and I didn't put it on hold. Is there anything here that you'd like to hold off on for cash flow reasons or any other? So now we have taken a lot of the human element out of it, but we are having the system do what the human element was doing, but more successfully. Managing prepaid expenses monthly. Recurring journals, right? You put it into the prepaid expense account. Every month you move a portion out to be the recognized expense. Well, we have something that's called deferral templates. All right, if you don't know that's what it's called, you might not ever find these. So you don't know what you don't know. Well, deferral templates allow you to put in an invoice, assign a deferral template to it, and post it, and have all of that prepaid recognition and allocation taken care of by simply designing or setting up deferral templates, associate them with a transaction. You can review just to see where it's going to go, like what months, how much. There's different ways the schedule can be done. You can do it based on the first day of the month. You can do it on the actual day you're posting it. There's all kinds of flexibility. I haven't ever had it not work for somebody. The only thing that I have heard, though, is that people will say, I don't like how it works because here's what it does. It actually post those in and outs into the future months. But we have separate posting date ranges in the allow for posting dates, where I could be restricted to only posting in this month any traditional entry, so anything that I am posting, but I can set up that when me as a user is posting something with a deferral template, that deferral template is allowed to post into this particular date range. And yes, it's in the future, but when I run my financial statements, I don't see that. And yes, there are ways to correct it if we need to pull it back. So if you can get over this thought of that I'm posting in the future, it's wonderful. If you can't and you don't like it, that's okay. Then my suggestion is, instead of regular journal entries, make sure you're at least using a recurring journal entry. Cash receipts from the bank, entering them in a journal. So you do a cash receipts journal, you print something out of the bank, you sit down at your desk, or you look at it on your screen. That's right, we have multiple monitors now. So I'm over here looking at the bank, and I'm over here and I'm typing it in, and I'm putting it into Business Central. Well, guess what? We have something we can use for that. It's called Payment Reconciliation Journal. You can go to your bank account, and if you haven't already set up your bank import statement, and by the way, it's really a bank import bank activity or bank transactions, because it's a statement won't work. It needs to be a kind of a CSV file or a text file of all the transaction lines. Just about every bank I know of, you can go in, look at your transactions and hit, that download to CSV. You take that information, you download it into that file. You have created the template using a statement import format, also known as a data exchange definition. You can do it automatically from your bank account. There's usually a prompt if you haven't done it. If you've already done it for your bank reconciliation, it uses the same exact one. And what it does is it takes the information out of that bank account and puts it, a bank file, and puts it right into a payment journal. And that payment journal can be used to apply it to the open entries, just like you would do with a cash receipt, and do it automatically. Or you can also do it where it applies and it reconciles it. So think about it. That's now taking all this data entry, maybe in two places, and making it into one automated step. If you're using lots of credit memos to fix dimension errors, you don't have to anymore. We have dimension correction. Now, dimension correction will make the change on the entries, but it will not make the change on the origin document, on the posted document. So you need to be aware of that. But usually we're making the changes because of the origin entries, or the ledger entries. We don't really care about the document. The document was just a way to get them in there. So if you don't care about that mismatch, dimension corrections are wonderful. Now, it's not something you're going to have everyone do, but look into it if you're doing a lot of dimension corrections. The other thing that you want to think about, though, is why are you having those problems? So investigate, do you need to do a better job of setting up default dimensions? And maybe you need to do a better job of enforcing that the dimension needs to be there. So you need to be setting up your value postings, which I call the rules. All right, there's so many more things I could go through, but we just don't have time. All right, I will tell you that this poll is so important to me, because if you have employees that are required to take part in any sort of process or personal improvement, you might be finding some of those things before or without needing to have a review. So please answer poll number 2. And are your employees required to take part in training in your company? Because if you are having regular training, you're going to be exposing people to deferral templates. You're going to be exposing people to recurring sales lines. If you are having people go to DynamicsCon, or you're having people go to Summit, they're going to learn about these things.
It looks like once a year has the consensus, and then 3 to 4 times a year is the second one.
Yay! Awesome.
No twice a year, no 5 or more times a year. Those are the only two.
Okay, well, that's good. So once a year, okay, I would love 3 to 4 times a year, but if you're doing it once a year, kudos to you. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. Can you DIY it? Can you do your own review? is there someone that everyone trusts and respects? Well, almost everyone. Nobody's perfect, right? Does this person have time to dedicate it to it? Because they're probably going to have to not do their regular job. Or maybe if somebody who this is part of their regular job, they just need to get down and do it. Can they say things as they really are, not what they think they are or what they used to be? I love it when somebody says, turn left where the Jones barn used to be. Well, how am I supposed to know where something used to be? Right? Or, oh, back in the day. No, not back in the day, it's today. Someone who's capable of outlining an operational process in a way that it's not dependent on your organization. So in other words, you put in a sales order. The sales order needs to be approved by a senior salesperson, not by Fred, okay? It needs to be done somewhat agnostically. Are they able to keep their ego in check? Because guess what? If they're an internal person, something along the way is going to touch on something that they do. And they're going to see that as being a challenge or criticism, and they need to be able to bite their tongue. They also have to be able to realize that a very small change in one area that seems inconsequential can have a huge impact down the road. And I've seen that more times than not. Do they know how to organize the effort? Where do you start? What are the best practices in various functional areas? The person that has a tendency to be the DIYer is the person who started working with a company, has been there for 30 years. Well, how do they know how other people do it? Oh, well, we're special. We're unique. We need to do things our own way. Well, doesn't knowing how other people do things and at least consider it maybe help you understand that maybe your way needs to be a little bit different? It's still going to be your way, but you need to make a change. How do you ask questions to get the most productive answers? Different personality types. I kind of joke about this, but it's so true. Whenever I am in the C-suite, I interact in one way. I'm always this energetic. I'm always this passionate. In fact, I was doing a presentation in front of the board of directors of the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and we were talking about costing methods. And I was standing up in front of them, and they wanted to understand the difference of LIFO, FIFO, and average. And I found myself jumping. So I stood to the left and I talked about FIFO, and I jumped to the middle and I talked about average, and I jumped to the right and I talked about FIFO. So I was still myself, but I had somebody come up to me and said, that was the best description of costing methods I've ever seen. Well, I mean, really seen, because I understood it. Okay. But when I go into a warehouse and when I know I'm going to be in the warehouse, I'm not jumping around, but I usually try to sneak into the conversation that my husband drives a sedan and I have an F-150 and I love it. And it's a 4-wheel drive and I have my sunroof and I pull horses, whatever. So I try to make sure that people understand I'm people. All right. And I do that in different ways with different people. Can that person do that? Probably not, because they have a reputation or people have a way of seeing them. And then the next thing is, when do you keep asking questions? When are you that 3-year-old? And how do you know when to stop? What tools do you use to best document the fits and the gaps in the system? And how do you communicate the results? And by the way, using an inside resource does not make it free. Do they know what in Business Central is not being used that should be to fix the problems? That's probably the biggest question. How do they know what they don't know? Now, I'm not saying you should use an outside resource. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I'm also not saying that you need to use the outside resource for everything. Maybe the outside resource comes in and does the initial review, provides you with all the documentation with their recommendations, which is what they should be doing. That's what I do. Like I'll say, I think you should use deferral templates, and here's why. Here's the problem, here's the solution. If you've been to my blog, cynthiapriebe.com, it's here's the problem, here's the solution. That's how I think. If you have a team that can do what they need to do to get the answers, if they know what the solution is, if we can get them started, then maybe you use an outside resource for the review, but then you go ahead and you implement the changes yourself. But it needs to be a qualified outside resource. They need to have the proven tools and methodologies. that person should be better at keeping the review on track. We don't need to do more than uncover the challenges when we're doing the review. The biggest problem is getting bogged down in trying to solve the problems right then. And that's what happens to me. I'll start talking to someone. I'm like, oh, I could show them this, or they could do that. Oh, this would be a great idea. But that's not what you're there for. You're there to uncover the problems. Now, you might have those ideas of possibilities in mind as you're talking and asking more questions. And you're not asking the questions to guide them to a certain solution, but you're asking the questions because you're aware of the solution opportunities, so you know what questions to ask. So remember when I said, does the inside resource know what questions to ask? I'm going to be less influenced by company politics. Somebody I'm working with right now, I told the sales manager, we were talking about the way pricing is done and pricing versus discounts. And that's another area that we have a tendency to focus on. And he's like, oh no, we have specific pricing for every single customer. I said, every single customer's pricing is different. So every time you go out to a customer, you just like make up pricing? He said, no, I think in terms of, all right, well, they're probably a tier 1 customer, so I usually give them a 10% discount. Or they're tier three customers, so I only give them 5% discount. I said, so you have standard pricing. Tier 1 is 10 and tier 3 is 5. Oh no, but they might have one item that's special. Well, fine, then they can have special pricing for that one item. They don't have, they have someone who's managing a spreadsheet for every single customer, and they have 100 customers. They have standard pricing. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to standard pricing. I could tell them that because I wasn't worried about my job. And again, as I mentioned, experienced working with people in many different roles. An outside resource will be more comprehensive while they're going through the review. They will work more quickly because they've done it before. They'll have an in-depth knowledge of the software, or they should have an in-depth knowledge of the software. I have an advantage of 20 years. There's a lot of people out there who do a great job of this that might not have the same knowledge of the software that I have, but they know where to get the answers, and they know how to ask the questions to find the problems that they need to get the answers for, and they will. All right, so that we don't run out of time, I got to keep going here. Higher confidence in the recommendations. So how often should you review? At least once a year. So kudos to everyone who's doing it at least once a year. You might need to make it more often because maybe you're finding so many problems that you think you need to do this more regularly, or maybe you are doing it more regularly, but you never get done with fixing the problems from the last one before you come up with the next one. So how long is it taking you to fix what you find? Maybe you need to make them less frequent. Do you review all functional areas every time you do a review? Or maybe you should consider kind of a cycle review. Or will you just adopt a formal continuous improvement approach? So you'll basically bring someone in or assign someone to be that continuous improvement manager. And I do work with organizations who have someone in that role. And that person is going to constantly be reviewing these processes. So poll number 3, will you rely on, or do you, we're stating, we rely on outside resources to support and improve our use of Business Central. Are you working with a partner or consultant? Do you reach out to them multiple times a week? Oh, we have a different number here. So sorry, Amy, use what's in the poll. So if you are using an outside resource on a regular basis, so if you're using them multiple times a week, that would be strongly agree, right? You really are using them. A few times a month would be agree. A few times a quarter is kind of neutral. A few times a year, you're not really using them. Once a year or less, you're not at all. So there, I just made a definition of what those meant.
Well, mostly everybody agrees.
Okay, great. So a few times a month, excellent. So you have someone that you can, so if you're running into a problem, you don't have to wait for your annual review. You can go to somebody, hey, we don't know what's available in the system to help us with this problem. All right, so how do you get started? Preparation, assign a project manager. Create enthusiasm, a realistic time frame and dates. Don't try to do it during your busy season. Don't try to do it when everyone's on vacation. Don't overload the participant list with management. Find people who are on the front line. You may need to convince someone. Some of your best frontline workers will be the least vocal in your organization, and they could be the best to include in your review. And by the way, a good consultant can help you uncover those people, give you tools to do that. Find passionate employees and encourage their participation. Again, a passionate employee does not need to be an extrovert. You could have the most introverted person who is the most passionate employee. You just need to know how to work with them. Again, a good consultant or a good project manager that's an internal person will know how to get the information from those people. But that's not all, folks. Create a code of conduct and adhere to it. For the project, literally have a code of conduct. I worked for an organization and we had silly string, and we would have brainstorming sessions. And when someone would like fire hose an idea instead of be supportive and ask questions in a supportive way, we got to spray them with silly string. They only did that for one TQM cohort because the cleaning people didn't like it. Gather SOPs and other process docs. You're going to have SOPs, but I guarantee you there's other process docs. They might be Post-it notes on somebody's monitor. Find your DIY or your outside resource. Notice how this is step number 8. Do all that other stuff first, because that's going to give you an idea whether or not it needs to be an outside resource if you were thinking it was going to be DIY. And create your teams to live long past the review. Think continuous improvement. Now, these are in the slide deck, and I'm not going to go through the detail on these. They have links, but even going through the overview as a task to set up Business Central can be a good place to start to see what you might not be using. Because if you implemented a while ago, you might not have ever looked back at the beginning. Use help and support. It's there for you. There's all kinds of places you can get information. Go to business apps. Look out there. Find those ISVs or those apps to fill the gap. Use Microsoft release plans. What it is, it's a view that's done through a Power App. It's a view of all of the release notes, and you can actually mark different items that are coming up and add them to your release plan so you can focus on what's important to you that's coming up and get rid of all the noise that doesn't matter. And of course, before I say search your MVP community, who knows how you know who's an MVP? Ben, I think you know the answer to this. They'll tell you. Well, you know what? We work hard for this. There's only 61 of us for the Business Central, and I think there's 30 or 22 in the United States, and 34% of those are women. The rest are men. And we all work hard by doing things like I'm doing today to make sure that we are sharing our knowledge with the community and not charging for it. And if you can support us, we appreciate it. And supporting us can be as simple as going and finding our blogs and signing up for those blogs and using the information that we provide. We have 1 minute for questions.
We had a lot of great comments. Yeah, support MVPs, please. That's number one takeaway for me today. Everybody has some great comments, Cynthia. No questions, but a lot of great comments. So
what I have on here is a QR code. If you scan that, you don't even have to worry about my email address. It takes you to LinkedIn. You can message me through LinkedIn. You can get to my blog. I post business content in LinkedIn. And if I post something, if Microsoft Dynamics Worlds publishes one of my articles, I always link to that in LinkedIn. So to me, kind of LinkedIn is my hub, because it's for me a way to get information to you. So thank you so much for everyone attending. I really appreciate your being here. And I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too and learned something.
Ben and I both need silly string. That's what we decided.
Yeah.
It was so much fun, but the cleaning people said, you can't ever do this again. It
Virtual
was
silly string, at least.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. All right,
well, if
great.
you do have any questions, we can also take them down. They'll be logged, and Cynthia can certainly get back to you as well. You don't have to feel like you have to ask them all now, but if you do have questions, reach out to us at any time. We'll make sure we get those answers to you.
Or reach out directly.
Yeah,
great,
thank you so much, Cynthia. This was so great, so informative. I mean, all the ways that you showed how to improve Business Central, I'm like, why aren't people doing it?
I think because you don't know,
Right.
well, again, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And you have good
And that's why
people
we do
who are
these kinds of
making it work.
workshops, right?
Yep.
To
Yep.
give that knowledge, share that knowledge with everybody so that they do
Yep.
know. So thank you. I
Exactly.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.